The USS Defiant moved through space like a tiny speck of dust against the endless black. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, watching the stars drift past on the main screen. His ship was small compared to the massive vessels that ruled the galaxy, but it was home to him and his crew of 4. "Captain, we're picking up something strange on the long-range sensors," said Lisa Carter from her navigation station. She was a thin woman with short brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "It looks like a distress signal, but it's coming from the Zilani system." Morrison frowned. The Zilani were peaceful people who lived on a beautiful blue world near the edge of known space. They had been trading partners with Earth for years, though both sides kept the relationship secret. The Zilani gave humans rare minerals that helped power their ships, and in return, humans provided medical supplies that had saved thousands of Zilani lives. "Put it on the main screen," Morrison ordered. The image flickered to life, showing a Zilani male with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. His face was covered in cuts and burns, and behind him smoke filled the air. The transmission was breaking up, but his words were clear enough. "This is Elder Vesh of the Zilani Council. Our world is under attack. The Corvan Empire has come. They are destroying our cities from orbit. We have no weapons that can reach their ships. Please, if anyone can hear this message, help us. They are taking our children. They are taking our children." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Defiant in complete silence. Morrison felt his stomach twist into knots. The Corvans were the most feared force in the galaxy. For 300 years, they had conquered every species they encountered. Their ships were the size of small moons, armed with weapons that could crack planets in half. No one had ever defeated them in battle. "Danny, how long would it take us to reach the Zilani system?" Morrison asked as chief engineer. Danny Walsh was a big man with grease-stained hands and a beard that needed trimming. He had been working on ships since he was 16 years old, and he knew every bolt and wire on the Defiant. "About 4 hours at maximum speed, Captain." "But sir, you're not thinking of going there, are you?" Morrison did not answer right away. He looked around at his crew. Amy Foster, his communications officer, was a young woman with red hair and freckles. She had joined the crew fresh out of the academy, full of hope and dreams about exploring the galaxy. Rick Barnes, the weapons specialist, was older and more experienced. He had fought in 3 different wars before joining the Defiant, and he understood the reality of combat better than anyone. "Amy, are you picking up any other signals from the Zilani system?" Morrison asked. "Yes, sir. The Corvan fleet is broadcasting on all frequencies. They're demanding complete surrender from the Zilani government. They're also sending messages to other systems, warning them not to interfere." Morrison closed his eyes and thought about the Zilani he had met during their secret trade meetings. They were kind people who had never hurt anyone. Their children played games similar to human children, and their elders told stories about the old days when the galaxy was free. Now those same children were being loaded onto Corvan slave ships. "Captain," Lisa said quietly, "I know what you're thinking, but we can't fight the Corvans. Our ship has 12 laser cannons and basic shields. A single Corvan destroyer could blow us apart without even trying." "She's right, sir," Rick added. "I've seen the battle reports. When the Corvans attacked the Threxian homeworld, they had over 200 warships defending it. The entire fleet was destroyed in less than 6 hours. We're just one small ship." Morrison understood their concerns. The Defiant was a reconnaissance vessel designed for speed and stealth rather than combat. It carried a crew of 5 and had been built to avoid fights, not win them. Against a Corvan fleet, it would be like a mouse challenging a pack of wolves. But Morrison also knew something about humans that the Corvans did not. He had read the history books about his species. Humans had a strange habit of doing impossible things when someone they cared about was in danger. They had fought wars against enemies with better weapons and more soldiers. They had crossed oceans in tiny boats and climbed mountains that should have killed them. They had even figured out how to fly among the stars when everyone said it could not be done. "Danny, what's the status of our weapon systems?" Morrison asked. All 12 laser cannons are working perfectly, sir. We've got full power to the shields and engines. The ship is in the best condition it's been in for months. Amy, send a message to Earth Command. Tell them our location and what we're planning. To do, make sure they know this is my decision, not theirs. Amy's fingers flew over her control panel. Message sent, Captain. But sir, they're going to order us to return to base immediately. Then we better be out of communication range before. They do, Morrison said with a slight smile. Lisa, set course for the Zolani system, maximum speed. Sir, are you sure about this? Lisa asked. If we reveal ourselves to the Corvans, they might trace us back to Earth. Our entire species could be in danger. Morrison had thought about that. 2. Earth's location was one of humanity's most closely guarded secrets. For 50 years, they had been careful to avoid any contact with the Corvan Empire. Human ships operated in the far reaches of space, trading with species that the Corvans considered too unimportant to bother with. If the Corvans learned about Earth, they would send their fleets to conquer it just like they had conquered every other world. But Morrison also knew that some things were more important than safety. The Zolani had trusted humans enough to trade with them. They had shared their knowledge and resources, asking for nothing in return except friendship. Now they were dying, and their children were being taken as slaves. I won't abandon them, Morrison said finally. We might be the only ship close enough to help. Rick stood up from his weapons station. Captain, if we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. The Corvans have probably never seen a human ship before. We might be able to surprise them. What do you have in mind? Morrison asked. We drop out of hyperspace right in the middle of their fleet. They'll be so shocked that they won't know how to react at first. That might give us a few minutes to figure out our next move. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one they had. Morrison looked at each member of his crew, seeing the fear in their eyes but also the determination. They were scared, but they were willing to follow him into what might be their final battle. All right, people. We're going to do something that's never been done before. We're going to face down a Corvan fleet and make them blink first. Lisa programmed the navigation computer while Danny pushed the engines to their maximum output. Amy prepared the communication systems, and Rick checked every weapon on the ship. Morrison sat in his command chair, watching the stars stream past as they jumped to hyperspace. 4 hours later, the Defiant dropped out of hyperspace in the middle of the Zolani system. On the main screen, Morrison could see the Corvan fleet. 12 massive warships arranged in a perfect attack formation around the blue-green world below. Smoke was rising from the planet's surface, and small escape pods were fleeing in all directions. Amy, open a channel to the Corvan fleet, Morrison ordered. Channel open, sir. Morrison took a deep breath and spoke the words that would change. Everything. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Defiant. You will cease your attack immediately and withdraw from this system. The galaxy held its breath as a single small ship faced down the most powerful military force in known space. The silence that followed Morrison's challenge seemed to stretch on forever. The Defiant hung motionless in space, surrounded by 12 Corvan warships that could have destroyed it with a single shot. On the bridge, nobody moved or spoke. Even the usual hum of the ship's engines seemed quieter than normal. Admiral Vex Korthek stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Void Render, staring at the tactical display with disbelief. In his 200 years of military service, he had never seen anything like this. A single small ship had appeared in the middle of his fleet and demanded that he withdraw. The ship's design was completely unknown to him, and its weapons were so primitive that his sensors barely registered them. "Sir, should we destroy the vessel?" asked his second-in-command, a tall Corvan with scars across his face from many battles. Korthek held up one clawed hand. "Wait, I want to know what species is foolish enough to challenge us." He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to the unknown vessel." The main screen on the Defiant flickered to life, showing the bridge of the Corvan flagship. Admiral Korthak was an imposing figure, standing nearly 9 feet tall with dark green skin covered in natural armor plates. His eyes were completely black, and when he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding metal. I am Admiral Vex Korthek of the Corvan Empire. You will identify yourself and explain why you have interfered with our operation. Morrison stood up from his command chair, meeting the alien's gaze without flinching. I am Captain Jake Morrison, of the human vessel Defiant. I have already made my demands clear. You will stop attacking the Zilani and leave this system immediately. Several Corvan officers on the enemy bridge began laughing, a sound that resembled rocks falling down a mountain. Korthek raised his hand for silence and studied Morrison carefully. The human was much smaller than a Corvan, with pale skin and strange hair covering the top of his head. His clothing appeared to be some kind of uniform, but it was made from materials that Korthek did not recognize. Human, Korthek said, testing the word. This species is unknown to us. Tell me, Captain Morrison, do you understand the situation you are in? My fleet consists of 12 warships, each one capable of destroying your vessel with ease. You have made demands that you cannot possibly enforce. Morrison crossed his arms. I understand the situation perfectly. You are bullying a peaceful species that cannot fight back? I'm here to make sure that stops. The Corvan admiral was genuinely puzzled. In 3 centuries of conquest, he had encountered thousands of different species. Some had fought bravely, others had surrendered immediately, and a few had tried to negotiate. But none had ever sent a single ship to challenge an entire fleet. It was not just tactically impossible, it was completely insane. Your ship carries 12 energy weapons, Korthek continued. My flagship alone has over 300. Your shields could not stop even one of our smallest guns. Why do you think you can succeed where entire fleets have failed? Morrison looked back at his crew. Lisa was monitoring the sensor readings, her face pale but determined. Danny was watching the engine readouts, ready to give them maximum power if they needed to run. Amy was recording everything, making sure that Earth would know what happened here. Rick was standing by the weapons controls, even though they all knew their guns would be useless against Corvan armor. Because someone has to try, Morrison said simply. The Zilani are good people. They don't deserve what you're doing to them. This answer seemed to confuse the Corvan admiral even more. You do not know these people. They are not your species. Why would you risk your lives for them? Because it's the right thing to do, Morrison replied. Korthek had heard many different reasons for resistance during his long career. Species had fought for their homeworlds, their families, their religions, and their freedom. But he had never heard anyone say they were fighting simply because it was right. The concept was completely foreign to Corvan thinking. You speak of right and wrong as if they have meaning, Korthek said. The strong survive and the weak serve. This is the natural order of the galaxy. We are strong, therefore we rule. The Zilani are weak, therefore they serve. You are also weak, therefore you will be destroyed, Morrison shook his head. That's not how things have to be. Just because you can hurt someone doesn't mean you should. The Corvan admiral studied Morrison for a long moment. There was something about the human that bothered him, though he could not identify what it was. Morrison showed no signs of fear, despite being completely outmatched. His crew was also calm, as if they had accepted their fate but were not troubled by it. This was unusual behavior for a species facing extinction. You interest me, Captain Morrison, Korthek said finally. I will make you an offer. Surrender your vessel and tell me the location of your homeworld. In exchange, I will kill you and your crew quickly instead of taking you as slaves. Counter-offer, Morrison said. Single combat between champions. If your champion wins, you can do whatever you want with my ship and crew. If my champion wins, you withdraw from this system and leave the Zilani alone. The bridge of the Void Render fell completely silent. Even the constant humming of the ship system seemed to stop. Korthek's officers looked at each other in amazement. The human was not just refusing to surrender, he was proposing a duel. Single combat, Korthek repeated slowly. You would risk everything on the outcome of a fight between 2 individuals. That's right, Morrison confirmed. Unless you're afraid your champion might lose, the insult hit its mark. Korthek's black eyes flashed with anger. No one had ever questioned Corvan fighting ability before. Their warriors were trained from birth to be perfect killing machines. They were stronger, faster, and more skilled than any other species in the galaxy. You dare to suggest that a human could defeat a Corvan warrior? Korthik growled. I'm suggesting that you put your money where your mouth is, Morrison replied. If Corvans are really as superior as you claim, then proving it shouldn't be a problem. Korthik considered the proposal carefully. It was completely outside standard Corvan military doctrine, but it also presented an opportunity. If he could capture some humans alive, his scientists could study them and learn about their capabilities. The location of their homeworld would be a valuable prize, and a new species of slaves would strengthen the Empire. I accept your challenge, Korthik announced. The combat will take place on my flagship. I will select my finest warrior to represent the Corvan Empire. Who will fight for the humans? Morrison did not hesitate. I will. On the Defiance Bridge, his crew members immediately began protesting. Lisa stood up from her station, her face filled with worry. Captain, you can't be serious. You've seen the size of these aliens. They're twice as tall as you and covered in natural armor. Let me fight instead, Rick said. I have more combat experience than anyone else on this ship. No, Morrison said firmly. This was my decision. I won't ask someone else to die for it. Amy was checking the communication logs from the Corvan ship. Sir, I'm picking up internal communications from their fleet. They're talking about you like you're some kind of curiosity. They've never seen a human before. That might work in our favor, Morrison said. They don't know what we're capable of, Danny snorted. Captain, with respect, what are we capable of? We're not stronger than they are. We're not faster. We don't have better weapons or armor. What advantage do we have? Morrison thought about that question as he prepared to beam over to the Corvan flagship. What did humans have that other species lacked? They were not the biggest or the strongest race in the galaxy. They were not the smartest or the most advanced. Their technology was primitive compared to the Corvans. Their ships were smaller and their weapons were weaker, but humans had something that Morrison was beginning to realize might be more important than any of those things. They had the ability to keep fighting even when victory seemed impossible. They had the stubborn refusal to give up, even when logic said they should. They had the strange habit of doing the right thing, even when it was dangerous. We have something they don't expect, Morrison said finally. We have the willingness to try. Admiral Korthak's voice came over the communication system. The combat will begin in 1 hour. You will beam aboard my flagship unarmed. My champion will be Captain Zeth Corval, winner of over 300 single combats. He has never been defeated. Morrison looked at his crew one more time. They were scared, but they were proud of him. They understood that he was about to attempt something that had never been done before. A human was going to fight a Corvan warrior. In single combat, with the fate of an entire world hanging in the balance. If I don't make it back, Morrison said quietly, get word to Earth about what happened here. Tell them that the Corvans exist and that they're coming. Tell them that we tried to do the right thing. You'll make it back, Captain, Lisa said with more confidence than she felt. You have to. Morrison nodded and walked toward the transporter room. In 1 hour, he would face the greatest warrior in the Corvan Empire. He had no idea how he was going to win, but he knew he had to try. The children of Zelani were counting on him, and he would not let them down. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were capable of when they decided to make a stand. The main hangar of the Void Render was enormous, large enough to hold several small ships. Thousands of Corvan warriors lined the walls, their black eyes fixed on the fighting arena in the center. The air was thick with tension as they waited to see their champion destroy the strange human who had dared to challenge their empire. Morrison stood at one end of the arena, wearing his simple spacesuit and carrying only basic human weapons. He looked tiny compared to the massive Corvan warriors surrounding him. His heart was beating fast, but his hands were steady. He had spent the last hour studying everything his crew could find about Corvan fighting techniques, though the information was limited. At the other end of the arena stood Captain Zeth Corval, the greatest warrior in the Corvan Empire. He was even larger than Admiral Korthek, standing nearly 10 feet tall with arms as thick as tree trunks. His natural armor was covered in scars from countless battles, and energy weapons were built into his forearms. He had never lost a single combat in his entire life. Admiral Korthek's voice echoed through the hangar. The rules are simple. Combat continues until one fighter cannot continue. The winner determines the fate of the Zilani world. He paused, looking directly at Morrison. Let the combat begin. Corval immediately raised his left arm, and a beam of pure energy shot toward Morrison. The human threw himself to the side, rolling across the metal floor as the beam burned a hole in the wall behind him. The Corvan warriors cheered, expecting the fight to end within seconds, but Morrison was already moving again. Instead of running away from Corval, he ran toward him, staying low and zigzagging to avoid the energy beams. The Corvan champion was confused by this strategy. Most opponents tried to keep their distance and use ranged weapons. Nobody had ever charged directly at him before. Morrison reached Corval and dove between his legs, coming up behind the giant warrior. He pulled out his sidearm and fired several shots at Corval's back, but the energy bolts bounced harmlessly off the natural armor. Corval spun around faster than Morrison expected, swinging his massive fist in a blow that would have crushed a human skull. Morrison ducked under the swing and rolled away, but Corval's other fist caught him in the shoulder. The impact sent Morrison flying across the arena, and he crashed into the wall with a sickening thud. The Corvan warriors roared. With approval, certain that the human was finished, Morrison pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. Blood was running down his arm, but he was still able to move. He had learned something important from that exchange. Corval was incredibly strong, and his armor was nearly impenetrable, but he was not as fast as Morrison had expected. The giant warrior was used to fighting opponents who relied on strength and heavy weapons. Corval fired another energy beam, but this time Morrison was ready. He had been watching the Corvan's movements, and he could see the slight tensing of muscles that happened just before each shot. Morrison moved to the side just as the beam fired, the energy passing harmlessly through empty air. The Corvan champion was becoming frustrated. He had fought hundreds of different species, but none of them had moved like this human. Morrison seemed to know where each attack was coming from before it happened. It was as if the human could read his mind. Morrison continued his strategy of hit-and-run attacks, striking at Corval's weak points and then moving away before the giant could retaliate. He aimed for the joints in the natural armor, places where the protection was thinner. His shots still could not penetrate the armor, but they were starting to annoy the Corvan warrior. The fight continued for several more minutes, with Morrison dodging and weaving while Corval grew more and more angry. The Corvan warriors watching from the walls began to mutter among themselves. This was not how their champion usually fought. Normally, his opponents were dead within the first few exchanges. Admiral Korthak watched the combat with growing concern. His military analysts were studying every movement, trying to understand how the human was surviving against their finest warrior. The human's reactions were impossibly fast, and his tactical thinking was unlike anything they had encountered. Before, Morrison's breathing was becoming labored and sweat was dripping into his eyes. He knew he could not keep dodging forever. Corval was getting used to his movement patterns, and it was only a matter of time before one of those energy beams found its target. He needed to do something unexpected. The opportunity came when Corval tried to corner Morrison against one of the walls. The Corvan champion raised both arms, preparing to fire energy beams that would cover all of Morrison's possible escape routes. But instead of trying to dodge, Morrison did something that shocked everyone in the hangar. He ran straight toward Corval. The Corvan warrior hesitated for just a moment, confused by the human's suicidal charge. That moment was all Morrison needed. He leaped onto Corval's chest, using the alien's own armor as handholds, and climbed up toward his head. Corval tried to grab Morrison with his massive hands, but the human was too small and too fast. Morrison reached into his utility belt and pulled out a small device that his crew had prepared for him. It was a simple electromagnetic pulse grenade designed to disrupt electronic systems. He pressed it against the side of Corval's head, where the energy weapons were controlled by neural implants. The grenade exploded with a flash of light, and Corval's energy weapons went dead. The giant warrior roared in rage and pain, grabbing Morrison and hurling him across the arena. Morrison hit the ground hard, but he rolled with the impact and came up running. Now the fight was more even. Corval still had his natural armor and incredible strength, but he could no longer attack from a distance. Morrison began using his superior speed and agility to stay out of reach while looking for another opportunity. The Corvan warriors were no longer cheering. They watched in silence as their champion struggled to catch the small human who darted around him like an annoying insect. Some of them were beginning to feel something they had never experienced before. Doubt. Morrison was getting tired, but he could see that Corval was frustrated and starting to make mistakes. The giant warrior was swinging wildly now, putting all his strength into attacks that Morrison could easily avoid. Each missed swing left Corval slightly off balance, and Morrison was beginning to see a pattern he could exploit. The end came suddenly. Corval made a massive overhead swing that would have crushed Morrison into the floor. But Morrison stepped aside at the last second, and Corval's fist hit the metal deck with tremendous force. The impact sent shockwaves through the giant's arm. And for just a moment he was completely defenseless. Morrison did not waste the opportunity. He pulled out his last weapon, a small explosive charge that was designed to breach ship hulls. He pressed it against one of the joints in Corval's armor, where the protection was weakest, and activated the timer. The explosion was small but precisely placed. It did not kill Corval, but it damaged his armor and sent him crashing to the ground. Morrison stood over the fallen warrior, breathing hard but still ready to fight, but Corval did not get up. The greatest warrior in the Corvan Empire lay motionless on the floor of his own flagship, defeated by a human who was half his size and carried weapons that the Corvans considered primitive. The hangar fell completely silent. Thousands of Corvan warriors stared in disbelief at the scene before them. Their champion, the fighter who had never lost a single combat, had been beaten by an unknown species that they had never heard of before. Admiral Korthak stepped forward, his face showing emotions that Morrison could not read. "The combat is finished," he announced. "The human has won." Morrison looked down at Corval, who was still breathing but clearly unable to continue fighting. Instead of celebrating his victory, Morrison did something that shocked every Corvan in the hangar. He knelt beside the fallen warrior and began checking his injuries. "He needs medical attention," Morrison said to Admiral Korthak. "His armor is damaged and he might have internal injuries." The Corvan admiral stared at Morrison in amazement. "You would help your defeated enemy?" "He fought with honor," Morrison replied. "He deserves to be treated with respect." This act of mercy toward a fallen opponent was completely beyond Corvan understanding. In their culture, defeated enemies were either killed or enslaved. The idea of helping someone who had just tried to kill you was impossible for them to comprehend. "Admiral." Korthak honored his agreement and ordered his fleet to withdraw from the Zelani system. But as Morrison beamed back to his own ship, the Corvan commander was already making plans. The humans had proven themselves to be unlike any species he had ever encountered. They were dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with their primitive weapons or small ships. They were dangerous because they refused to accept that the strong should rule the weak. They were dangerous because they fought for others instead of just themselves. Most dangerous of all, they were dangerous because they had just proved that the mighty Corvan Empire could be defeated. As the Defiant left the Zelani system, Morrison knew that this was only the beginning. The Corvans would not forget what had happened here. They would come looking for the human homeworld, and when they found it, they would bring everything they had. But for now, the children of Zelani were safe, and that was what mattered most. News of Morrison's impossible victory spread across the galaxy faster than anyone could have imagined. On distant worlds that had been conquered by the Corvan Empire, people gathered around secret communication devices to hear the story told and retold. For the first time in 3 centuries, the name of a species that had stood up to the Corvans was being whispered in back alleys and hidden meeting places. Admiral Korthek returned to the Corvan capital world with his fleet intact, but his reputation damaged. The High Command was furious that he had allowed a single unknown ship to humiliate their finest warrior. More importantly, they were terrified of what Morrison's victory might inspire in their conquered subjects. The admiral stood before a council of 7 Corvan overlords, each one more ancient and cruel than the last. Their meeting chamber was carved from black stone, and the walls were decorated with the skulls of defeated enemies from dozens of different species. "Explain to us how your champion was defeated by a primitive alien," demanded Overlord Vox, his voice like grinding metal. Captain Corval had won over 300 combats. He was supposed to be invincible. Kortha kept his eyes fixed straight ahead. "The humans fight differently than any species we have encountered. They do not rely on superior strength or advanced technology. They use strategy and adaptability to overcome their enemies." "Strategy," repeated Overlord Kess with disgust. "Cowardice. You mean proper warriors face their enemies with strength and honor?" "With respect, Overlord, the human showed great courage," Korthik said carefully. "He knew he was outmatched, but he fought anyway. And when he won, he showed mercy to his defeated opponent. This behavior is unlike anything in our experience." The overlords exchanged dark looks. Mercy was considered a weakness by Corvan standards, but they understood that other species might see it differently. If word spread that the Corvans could be defeated and that their enemies would be treated well, it could inspire rebellions throughout their empire. "Find their homeworld," ordered Overlord Vox. "Locate this Earth and destroy it completely. Make an example that will remind the galaxy what happens to those who oppose us." Meanwhile, the USS Defiant was heading back toward human space at maximum speed. Morrison sat in his command chair, watching the stars stream past on the main screen. His shoulder was still sore from the fight with Corval, but the ship's medical supplies had healed most of his injuries. "Captain, we're receiving a priority message from Earth Command," Amy announced from her communication station. "Put it through," Morrison replied. The image of General Patricia Stone appeared on the screen. She was a stern woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too many wars. Her expression was a mixture of pride and worry as she looked at Morrison. "Captain, congratulations on your victory, but you've also created the biggest problem humanity has ever faced," she said without any greeting. "Intelligence reports indicate that the Corvan Empire is mobilizing search fleets to find Earth. They want revenge for what you did." Morrison felt his stomach sink. He had known this might happen, but hearing it confirmed made the reality hit home. "How long do we have, General?" "Our best estimates give us maybe 6 months before they narrow down our location. The good news is that your victory has inspired resistance movements on over 30 conquered worlds. Species that haven't fought back in centuries are suddenly attacking Corvan outposts." Lisa looked up from her navigation console. "General, are we going to evacuate Earth?" "Negative," Stone replied firmly. "We're not running. But we are preparing for the fight of our lives." "Captain Morrison, you're being reassigned to a special task force. We need to develop new strategies for fighting the Corvans, and you're the only human who has actually beaten one of their warriors." When the transmission ended, Morrison turned to his crew. They had been through so much together over the past few days, and now they were about to face even greater challenges. "What do you think, people? Ready to help save the human race?" Danny grinned and wiped his hands on his coveralls. "Captain, after what we just pulled off, I think we can handle anything the Corvans throw at us." 3 weeks later, Morrison found himself in a secure facility on the dark side of Earth's moon. The base was hidden inside an old mining complex, and it housed the most advanced military research in human space. He worked with a team of specialists who were developing new ways to fight an enemy that was superior in every conventional measure. Dr. Kevin Hayes was a thin man with thick glasses who had spent his entire career studying alien technology. He had managed to get his hands on some damaged Corvan equipment from old battle sites, and he was trying to understand how their systems worked. The problem is that everything they build is designed around raw power, he explained to Morrison. Their weapons are incredibly strong, but they're not very flexible. Their ships are huge and tough, but they're also slow to change direction. Commander Julie Parks was a tactical specialist who had been studying Corvan battle records for years. She spread out holographic displays showing fleet movements from dozens of different conquests. They always use the same basic strategy, she said. Overwhelming force applied directly to the enemy's strongest point. They just keep hitting until their opponents break. But what if we don't give them a strong point to hit? Lieutenant Bobby Chun was monitoring Corvan communications from across the galaxy. His equipment could intercept their military broadcasts, though most of them were heavily encrypted. The resistance movements are causing real problems for them, he reported. They're having to split their forces to deal with uprisings on multiple worlds. Some of their garrison troops are actually requesting reinforcements. Morrison studied the information carefully. An idea was beginning to form in his mind, but it was so dangerous that he hesitated to suggest it. What if we don't try to fight them at all? He said finally. The others looked at him in confusion. Julie frowned and pointed at the tactical displays. Captain, they're coming to destroy Earth. We have to fight them. No, I mean, what if we don't fight them the way they expect? Morrison clarified. They're used to battles between fleets of warships. Big ships shooting at other big ships until one side wins. But what if we do something completely different? Dr. Hayes adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. What did you have in mind? Morrison walked over to a display showing the Corvan Empire's territory. Hundreds of star systems were marked in red, representing worlds under their control. They rule through fear, he said. Their entire empire is based on the idea that they're unbeatable. But we've already proved that's not true. What if we could prove it again and again all across the galaxy? You want to attack their outposts? Julie asked. Not attack them, embarrass them. Show up where they don't expect us, make them look foolish, and then disappear before they can respond. Every time we do it, more species will realize that the Corvans can be beaten. Bobby was already pulling up communication intercepts. It could work. The resistance movements are getting stronger. Every day. If we could coordinate with them, we might be able to cause real damage to their control. Dr. Hayes was studying the Corvan technology displays. We could modify our ships to be even faster and more maneuverable. If we can't match their firepower, we can at least outrun them. Morrison felt the excitement building in the room. It was a crazy plan, but it might be humanity's only chance. Instead of trying to fight the Corvan Empire head-on, they would convince the galaxy to fight itself. Over the next few months, Morrison's team worked around the clock to prepare for their campaign. They modified human ships with new stealth systems and improved engines. They established secret communication networks with resistance groups on dozens of worlds. Most importantly, they trained human crews in the tactics of hit-and-run warfare. Captain Lisa Carter was given command of a fast scout ship called the Liberty. Her mission was to establish contact with alien resistance leaders and coordinate their attacks. Commander Julie Parks took charge of a stealth vessel designed to gather intelligence deep in Corvan territory. Even Danny and Amy were given their own ships to command. But Morrison knew that all their preparations might not be enough. The Corvan search fleets were getting closer to Earth every day, and Admiral Korthak was leading the hunt personally. The Admiral had become obsessed with finding the human homeworld and destroying the species that had humiliated his empire. As Morrison stood in the observation deck of the lunar base, looking out at the blue marble of Earth hanging in space, he wondered if he had doomed his entire species by making that first impossible stand. But then he remembered the Zelani children who were now safe on their homeworld, and he knew he had made the right choice. The galaxy was changing. For the first time in centuries, conquered species were beginning to believe that freedom was possible. The Corvan Empire was still the most powerful force in known space, but it was no longer invincible. Soon, everyone would have to choose a side in the coming war between tyranny and freedom. Morrison just hoped that humanity would survive long enough to see which side would win. 6 months after Morrison's victory over Captain Corval, Admiral Korthak's massive fleet finally found Earth. 30 Corvan warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, their weapons charged and ready for battle. The Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the small blue world that had produced the species responsible for his humiliation. Finally, Korthak said to his officers, we will show the galaxy what happens to those who dare to challenge the Corvan Empire. But as his fleet moved toward Earth, something unexpected happened. Human ships began appearing all around them, not in formation for a traditional battle, but scattered across the entire system. Morrison's strategy was finally being put to the test. The USS Defiant moved through the asteroid belt, using the floating rocks as cover. Morrison watched his tactical display as more human vessels took their positions. They had 12 ships in total, each one designed for speed and maneuverability rather than heavy combat. Against 30 Corvan warships, it should have been a hopeless fight. All ships, this is Morrison, he broadcast on the encrypted human frequency. Remember, we're not trying to destroy their fleet. We're trying to prove a point. Captain Lisa Carter's voice came back over the radio from her position near Jupiter. Liberty standing by, Captain. The resistance groups across the galaxy are watching. If we fail here, the rebellions will collapse. Commander Julie Parks was hiding behind one of Saturn's moons in her stealth ship. Intelligence reports that Korthak has brought his entire personal fleet. He wants to make sure Earth is completely destroyed. Morrison took a deep breath and opened a channel to the Corvan. Flee. Admiral Korthak, this is Captain Morrison. I assume you're here for revenge. The alien admiral's face appeared on the main screen, his black eyes filled with hatred. Captain Morrison, you have caused considerable trouble for my empire. Today, that ends. Your world will be reduced to dust, and your species will be erased from history. Before you do that, Morrison said calmly, I have something to show you. Computer, display Galactic Communication Network. The main screen split to show dozens of different star systems across the galaxy. On world after world, alien species were gathered around communication devices, watching the confrontation between the human and Corvan fleets. The resistance movements that had been inspired by Morrison's first victory were now coordinating their efforts across hundreds of planets. You see, Admiral, your empire has a problem, Morrison continued. The galaxy isn't afraid of you anymore. While you've been hunting for Earth, we've been talking to your slaves. Turns out, a lot of them are tired of being slaves. Korthak's expression darkened as he realized what he was seeing. Reports had been coming in for months about increasing rebel activity, but he had not understood the scope of the problem. Now he could see that the human victory had inspired something much larger than a few isolated uprisings. It does not matter, Korthak snarled. Once your homeworld is destroyed, these rebellions will collapse. The galaxy will remember why they should fear us, maybe, Morrison said. But they'll also remember that humans died fighting for their freedom. And that might inspire even more people to keep fighting. The Corvan admiral had heard enough. All ships begin bombardment of the third planet, destroy everything. But as the Corvan fleet moved toward Earth, Morrison's ships began their harassment campaign. The human vessels darted in and out of the enemy formation, too fast for the massive Corvan ships to target effectively. They fired at sensor arrays and communication equipment, trying to blind and confuse their opponents rather than destroy them. The Liberty, commanded by Lisa Carter, used its superior speed to stay just out of range of the Corvan weapons. Her ship fired precisely aimed shots at the enemy engines, not trying to destroy the massive vessels but attempting to slow them down. Julie Parks and her stealth ship appeared and disappeared like a ghost, striking at the Corvan fleet's coordination systems. Every time the aliens tried to organize their formation, another critical system would be damaged by an attack they never saw coming. Morrison himself took the Defiant directly toward Admiral Korthak's flagship, weaving between the energy beams that filled space around him. His crew worked with perfect coordination, Lisa at navigation anticipating every enemy move, Danny pushing the engines beyond their design limits, Amy coordinating with the other human ships, and Rick targeting the most critical systems on the enemy vessels. The Corvan fleet was becoming frustrated and disorganized. They were used to battles where two fleets lined up and traded devastating blows until one side was destroyed. But the humans refused to fight that kind of battle. Instead, they struck quickly and then vanished, only to appear somewhere else and strike again. "Sir, our formation is breaking apart," reported Korthak's second-in-command. "The human ships are too fast for our targeting systems. They're hitting us from all directions." Admiral Korthak realized that he was facing the same problem that Captain Corval had encountered in single combat. The humans did not fight the way other species fought. They used their weaknesses as strengths, turning their smaller size and weaker weapons into advantages through superior tactics and determination. But the real blow came when Morrison opened a channel to the entire galaxy, broadcasting on every frequency that existed. His transmission would reach every world in known space, including all the planets under Corvan control. "People of the galaxy," Morrison said, his voice calm and steady despite the battle raging around him. "You are watching the Corvan Empire attack Earth with 30 warships against our 12. We are outgunned and outnumbered, but we are not outfought. We are here to prove that no one has to live in fear anymore." As Morrison spoke, the human ships continued their hit-and-run attacks. They were taking damage, but they were also proving that the mighty Corvan fleet could be frustrated and confused by a smaller, more determined enemy. "We are not the strongest species in the galaxy," Morrison continued. "We are not the smartest, or the most advanced, but we refuse to kneel. We refuse to accept that might makes right, and we refuse to let bullies terrorize innocent people." On worlds across the galaxy, the watching species saw something they had never seen before. The Corvan fleet, which should have destroyed the human ships in minutes, was being held at bay by inferior vessels commanded by a species they had never heard of. The turning point came when Admiral Korthak, in his frustration, made a critical mistake. He ordered his entire fleet to focus their fire on Morrison's ship, determined to destroy the human captain who had become the symbol of resistance against Corvan rule. But Morrison was ready for this. As 30 Corvan warships turned their weapons toward the Defiant, the other 11 human ships struck at once. They hit the Corvan fleet's command and control systems, communication arrays, and navigation equipment. In their eagerness to destroy Morrison, the Corvans had left themselves vulnerable to a coordinated attack. The Corvan fleet suddenly found itself blind and deaf, unable to coordinate their movements or communicate with each other. Several ships collided as they tried to maneuver without proper navigation. Others fired at their own vessels, mistaking them for human ships in the confusion. Morrison seized the moment and opened another channel to Admiral Korthak. "Admiral, your fleet is in chaos, your ships are damaging each other. Your empire is facing rebellions on 100 worlds. How does it feel to be on the losing side for once?" Korthak stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. His overwhelming numerical advantage had become meaningless because his ships could no longer work together effectively. The humans had not destroyed his fleet, but they had made it useless. "This is impossible," Korthak said. "You cannot defeat." "Yes, we are the Corvan Empire." "No," Morrison replied. "You were the Corvan Empire. Now you're just another group of bullies who picked on the wrong species." Across the galaxy, the watching species saw the Corvan fleet retreating from Earth in disorder. The ships that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 centuries were running away from 12 small human vessels. The message was clear to everyone. The age of Corvan dominance was ending. In the months that followed, rebellions erupted on every world under Corvan control. Species that had been slaves for generations remembered what freedom felt like. The Corvan Empire did not collapse overnight, but its power was broken forever. Morrison returned to Earth as the hero who had changed the galaxy. But when people asked him how he had known that humans could defeat the Corvans, he always gave the same answer. "I didn't know we could win. I just knew we had to try." The galaxy learned that day that the greatest victories are not won by the strongest or the smartest, but by those who refuse to give up when fighting for what is right. And sometimes that refusal to surrender is enough to change everything.